The wrong ship. Jake Torres crouched in the shadows of the abandoned shipyard, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The night air on Colony World Nexus 7 carried the metallic scent of rust and decay, mixed with the distant hum of the city's industrial sector. In his backpack, 6 canisters of specialized nanopaint clinked softly as he moved between the hulking remains of decommissioned vessels. The Crimson Wolves had given him a simple job: mark their territory on the sleek transport ship sitting alone in Sector 12. The pay was good enough to cover his rent for 3 months, and Jake needed the money. His legitimate work as a freelance mechanical engineer barely covered the basics, but his reputation as Razor in the underground art scene kept him afloat. He studied his target through night vision goggles. The ship was a beauty, even in the dim starlight. Unlike the rusted hulks surrounding it, this vessel maintained clean lines and pristine hull plating. Something felt off about finding such a well-maintained ship in this graveyard of forgotten dreams, but Jake pushed the doubt aside. The Wolves had done their research, and questioning their intelligence wasn't his job. Jake approached the ship with practiced silence, his soft-soled boots making no sound on the cracked concrete. He'd been doing this for 5 years, ever since he'd dropped out of the Colonial Engineering Academy. The streets had taught him skills no classroom ever could, and tonight those skills would earn him another payday. The first symbol went up smoothly. Jake's hand moved with precise strokes, the nanopaint hissing softly as it bonded with the hull. The Crimson Wolf's distinctive marker, stylized wolf's head surrounded by geometric patterns, began to glow with bioluminescent particles. The nanobots in the paint would make the tag impossible to remove without specialized equipment, a fact that had made Jake's services highly sought after among the colony's various gangs. As he stepped back to admire his work, Jake noticed something that made his blood run cold. The hull plating around his tag was warming up, and faint lights were beginning to flicker behind what he'd assumed were dead viewports. This wasn't an abandoned ship, was very much alive. Before Jake could process this revelation fully, a hatch near the ship's stern opened with a quiet pneumatic hiss. Emergency lighting illuminated a figure in military fatigues, a woman in her 30s with short black hair and intense dark eyes. She held a compact pulse rifle with casual competence. The muzzle pointed just to the left of Jake's center mass. "Drop the paint canisters and step away from the ship," she said, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Jake raised his hands slowly, his mind racing. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I was just doing a job. If this is your ship, I can remove the tag and you can't remove it." The woman interrupted, stepping fully out of the ship. "Nanopaint with quantum bonding agents. Once it's on, it's permanent unless you have a molecular disassembly unit." She studied the glowing symbol on her hull with professional interest rather than anger. "Impressive work, actually. Clean lines. Perfect symmetry. You're not just some street punk, are you?" Jake's shoulders tensed. "I'm an engineer. Was an engineer. It's complicated. Captain Elena Vasquez, Human Colonial Defense Force," she said, lowering her weapon slightly. "And you? Just painted gang symbols on a classified military vessel." She paused, tilting her head as if listening to something Jake couldn't hear. "Actually, you may have just saved our lives." Before Jake could ask what she meant, another figure emerged from the ship, a young Asian man in pilot's gear, his hands dancing over a portable scanner. "Captain, the kid's artwork just triggered something in the Hegemony surveillance network." We've got 3 patrol ships changing course toward our position. Eta, 12 minutes. Jake's confusion deepened. Hegemony. What are you talking about? Captain Vasquez made a decision that would change everything. Lieutenant Chen, secure the perimeter. Razor, yes, I know your street name. You're about to learn why your government has been lying to you about humanity's place in the galaxy. She gestured for Jake to follow her into the ship, against every instinct screaming at him to run. Jake found himself stepping through the hatch into a world he'd never imagined existed. The ship's interior was a marvel of human engineering pushed to its absolute limits. Every surface served multiple purposes. Every system had been refined to peak efficiency. This wasn't the bloated, wasteful technology Jake had grown accustomed to seeing in the colony's civilian sector. This was technology born of desperation and refined by necessity. 3 years ago, Captain Vasquez began as they moved through the ship's corridors. Humanity made first contact with the hegemony, a coalition of alien species that controls this sector of the galaxy. The official story is that we're honored junior members, protected and guided by our benevolent alien allies. Her expression hardened. The truth is that we're considered a primitive species, suitable only for manual labor and resource extraction. The colonies exist to feed raw materials back to hegemony core worlds. Jake stopped walking. That's impossible. The colonial authority would never. The colonial authority answers to hegemony governors. Lieutenant Chen called from his position at a sensor station. Human leaders who sold out their own species for personal power and extended lifespans. They reached the ship's command center, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The space was designed for maximum efficiency, with holographic displays showing tactical information, ship systems, and what appeared to be a star map with dozens of marked positions. We're part of the Human Liberation Network, Captain Vasquez explained. Small cells of military personnel, engineers, scientists, and civilians working to gather intelligence and prepare for the day when humanity can throw off the hegemony's chains. She pointed to the star map. There are ships like this one hidden throughout human space, disguised as everything from cargo haulers to derelict wrecks. Jake studied the displays, his engineer's mind automatically analyzing the data. The technology level here. This is at least 50 years ahead of anything I've seen in civilian applications. That's what happens when necessity meets human ingenuity, Chen said without looking up from his instruments. When your species' survival is on the line, you find ways to make things work that shouldn't be possible. An alarm chimed softly, and the captain's expression grew grim. Hegemony patrol ships are 8 minutes out. Your artwork, Razor, contains quantum entangled particles that respond to hegemony scanning frequencies. They use it to track gang activity, but it also means they can detect our ship now. Jake felt a wave of guilt wash over him. I'm sorry, I didn't know. If you can get me to a molecular disassembly unit, I can try to. There's no time. Vasquez cut him off. And even if there were, the damage is done. They've got our position locked in. She turned to face him fully. But you might have given us an opportunity we didn't know we had. Chen looked up from his station. The quantum particles in the paint. They're not just tracking beacons. They're part of a larger network. If we could reverse the signal flow, Jake's engineering instincts kicked in. We could use their own surveillance system against them. Feed false data, create phantom signals, maybe even overload their sensors with cascading feedback loops. The captain smiled for the first time since Jake had met her. Exactly, but we'd need someone who understands both the street-level technology and has the engineering background to modify our systems on the fly. You want me to help you fight aliens? Jake said slowly, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. I want you to help us save humanity, Vasquez replied. The hegemony has been slowly strangling human development for 3 years. Every new innovation gets seized and handed over to alien researchers. Every promising human scientist or engineer gets transferred to advanced research facilities that are actually prison camps. Your colony is scheduled for population reduction. Next year, 50% of all humans relocated to mining worlds where the life expectancy is roughly 5 years. Jake stared at the tactical display showing the approaching alien ships. 3 vessels, each twice the size of their disguised transport, armed with weapons that could reduce the entire shipyard to molten slag in minutes. Everything he'd believed about humanity's place in the galaxy had been a lie. And now he was being asked to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. What do you need me to do? Jake asked. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Jake's hands flew over jury-rigged interfaces as he connected his remaining nanopaint canisters to the ship's sensor array. The quantum particles that had betrayed their location were being reprogrammed to serve as a weapon instead of a beacon. Lieutenant Chen worked beside him, his pilot's knowledge of electronic warfare combining with Jake's street-smart understanding of improvised technology. Captain Vasquez coordinated their efforts while simultaneously preparing the ship's defensive systems. Hegemony ships dropping out of hyperspace, Chen announced. 3 Enforcer-class patrol vessels, full sensor sweeps, active. Through the ship's external cameras, Jake got his first look at alien technology in action. The hegemony ships were elegant and deadly, their hulls seeming to shift and flow like liquid mercury. Energy discharges danced along their surfaces as they powered up weapons systems that could punch through planetary shields. They're hailing us, Chen reported. Standard surrender demand. They want us to power down and prepare for boarding. Not happening, Vasquez said grimly. Razor R. You ready? Jake's finger hovered over the activation switch for their improvised countermeasure system. Everything they'd rigged together in the past few minutes was theoretical, untested, and probably suicidal. But looking at the displays showing the alien ships positioning themselves for an attack run, Jake realized that surrender wasn't an option. Either, let's show these bastards what human creativity looks like, Jake said, and activated the system. The quantum particles in his nanopaint suddenly blazed with energy, creating a cascade effect that spread through the hegemony surveillance network like wildfire. On the enemy ship's sensors, the single human transport suddenly appeared to multiply into dozens of phantom contacts, each one broadcasting the signature of a heavily armed warship. Asterisk. Human ingenuity unleashed. The lead hegemony ship's response was immediate and violent. Energy beams lanced out toward their position, but the aliens were firing at sensor ghosts created by Jake's modified nanopaint. The real transport remained untouched as explosions lit up the night sky around phantom targets. It's working. Chen shouted over the sound of the ship's engines spinning up to full power. Their targeting systems are completely confused. They're firing at empty space. Captain Vasquez was already moving to the next phase of their desperate plan. Razor, can you maintain the phantom network while we maneuver? Jake's hands danced over the improvised controls, sweat beating on his forehead as he struggled to keep the complex system stable. The quantum entanglement is holding, but I can't sustain this forever. The feedback loops are building up heat faster than our cooling systems can handle. Through the external cameras, Jake watched the hegemony ships adapt to their tactic with disturbing speed. The elegant alien vessels were beginning to fire in broader patterns, attempting to bracket their real position despite the sensor confusion. "They're learning," Vasquez observed grimly. "We need a new approach." Jake's mind raced, combining his street knowledge with everything he'd learned about the ship's systems in the past hour. An idea began to form, crazy, dangerous, and typically human in its complete disregard for conventional thinking. "Captain, what if we don't just confuse their sensors? What if we turn their own weapons against them?" Chen looked up from his pilot station. "The quantum particles are still connected to their surveillance network. If we could reverse modulate the signal frequency, we could make their targeting computers think their own ships are enemy vessels," Jake finished. "They'd start firing on each other." Vasquez studied the tactical display where the alien ships were tightening their attack formation. "The risk is enormous. If we fail, we've just painted a bigger target on ourselves. And if we succeed, we commit an act of war against the most powerful military force in the galaxy," Jake said quietly. "I know. The captain's decision took less than 3 seconds. Do it. The war started 3 years ago when they decided humanity was only good for slave labor. We're just finally fighting back." Jake's fingers flew over the controls, rebuilding the quantum particle network from a defensive measure into an offensive weapon. The mathematics involved was staggering. He was essentially hijacking an alien computer network and reprogramming it in real time while under enemy fire. Lieutenant Chen provided covering support, using the ship's limited defensive systems to deflect the increasingly accurate hegemony fire. Energy shields flared and sparked as they absorbed impacts that would have vaporized a civilian vessel. "Almost there," Jake muttered, watching lines of code scroll across his improvised interface. "Just need to establish a stable feedback loop." And the breakthrough came like lightning. Suddenly, the quantum network that had been working against them became their greatest weapon. Jake's modified code propagated through the hegemony surveillance system, carrying a simple but devastating payload, new targeting parameters that identified the alien ships as hostile contacts. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The lead hegemony vessel suddenly pivoted and fired a full spread of energy weapons at its nearest companion. The second ship's defensive shields flared brilliant blue as they absorbed the unexpected attack. "By the stars," Chen breathed. "They're actually shooting at each other." The alien ship's communication systems erupted with what Jake could only assume were very angry alien voices. The surveillance network he'd compromised was feeding contradictory information to each vessel, making their own companions appear as enemy targets, while rendering the human ship nearly invisible to their sensors. But the aliens weren't helpless. Even as their automated systems fought against Jake's intrusion, their crews were adapting. Emergency protocols kicked in, manual override systems came online, and the chaotic friendly fire began to slow as alien commanders reasserted control over their weapons. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they shut down the compromised network entirely," Jake warned. "After that, we're back to being outgunned 3-1 by ships that want us dead." Captain Vasquez was already ahead of him. "Then we don't give them 2 minutes. Chen, plot a course for the nearest hyperspace jump point. Maximum acceleration." "Captain, our hyperdrive is still in stealth mode. If we activate it now, they'll detect our true capabilities. Better to reveal our secrets and live than maintain our cover and die," Vasquez replied. "Besides, after what Razor just did to their computer systems, I think our cover is thoroughly blown anyway." The ship's hyperdrive came online with a deep harmonic thrum that Jake felt in his bones. Around them, reality began to twist as the vessel prepared to tear a hole in space-time itself. But the hegemony ships had finally overcome Jake's sabotage, and their weapons were swinging back toward the human transport's true position. 15 seconds to hyperspace transition, Chen announced, his hands steady on the controls despite the energy beams. Beginning to bracket their position, Jake watched the tactical display with fascination and terror. The alien ships were moving. With inhuman precision, their formation designed to prevent any escape vector. In 10 seconds, they would have the human ship trapped in a crossfire that no amount of ingenuity could overcome. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting inevitable defeat. "Captain, I've still got partial access to their targeting network," Jake called out. "If I overload the quantum particles in one final pulse, I can create a massive sensor bloom that might blind them long enough for us to jump. Will that work?" "I have no idea," Jake admitted. "But it's the most human plan I can think of. Try something impossible and see what happens." Vasquez laughed despite their desperate situation. "Do it." Jake channeled every remaining quantum particle in his nanopaint system into a single, devastating pulse. The energy surge was so intense that it overloaded his improvised interface, sending sparks cascading across the command center. On the tactical display, the hegemony ship's sensor readings became a chaotic maze of false contacts and system errors. "Jump," Vasquez ordered. Reality twisted, stretched, and then snapped back into focus as the human ship punched a hole through the fabric of space-time itself. Behind them, the hegemony patrol vessels were left dealing with sensor systems that would take hours to fully recalibrate in hyperspace. Surrounded by the swirling colors of folded space, Jake finally allowed himself to breathe. They had survived. More than that, they had won 3 human rebels against impossible odds, using nothing but creativity, determination, and a complete willingness to attempt the impossible. "So," Jake said, after a long moment of silence, "what happens now, Captain?" Vasquez turned from the navigation display where she was plotting their course to a safe harbor. "Now you become part of something larger. The Human Liberation Network has cells throughout the colonies, and they all need people with your particular combination of skills, street smarts, and engineering knowledge.